Good morning once again to everyone here live from Bendigo in central Victoria. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Dja Dja Wurrung of the elders past, present and future. And also acknowledge that their struggles are our struggles, where they've been fighting the same foes as we have been for well over 200 years to liberate themselves. Well, it's been one busy week for myself. We just had a lot of freezing cold weather come up from the Antarctic, snowing in Ballarat, which is only just under an hour away here from Bendigo. Yesterday, snow on the mountains. I did say last week too that I'm having a long weekend this weekend. I have a rostered day off on Monday. I'm planning to actually be out and about. I want to take my car for a spin and have a look at some of the mountains, probably maybe go down the coast. We've had restrictions lifted to a certain degree here in regional Victoria. Melbourne's still in stage 4, still some time to go there. Yeah, we still have to wear masks outside and keep and abide by social distancing measures, only certain gatherings up to an X amount. At the same time, at least it's a lot more positive now. At least I can, if I like to go out on a weekend somewhere, go and visit a place where I like to do, like a national park, go for a bushwalk, maybe go for a nice drive. There's plenty to see, but at the moment I can't really go and visit Melbourne while it's still in stage 4. I can only strictly go there if it's for work purposes only. But it's been a positive sign. No cases have fallen further here in Victoria, which is a big positive plus. So maybe restrictions there will start being lifted over the next 2 weeks here in Melbourne. Well, it's actually another interesting date that's happened during this week, 24th of September. I just looked on Facebook. The 24th of September 1945 is the anniversary when members of the Waterside Workers Federation, or what we call here in Australia wharfies, overseas you refer them as dock workers, went on strike. They refused to load Dutch ships, because the Dutch were trying to fight the Indonesian resistance. Indonesia achieved its independence in 1949, but international working class solidarity calls, and fortunately the Waterside Workers Federation, led by communist leadership, they decided to, nope, we're not loading any Dutch ships at all, and which actually hindered the Dutch colonialists big time. And in 1949, Indonesia was able to achieve its independence. So I just wanted to share that to you, some Australian history and working class history there as well. And it's vitally important that we know our history, learn from it, and we can maybe even look at some of the mistakes that we made, but also the positives as well. Something to be proud of for us working class people here in Australia. Now, something interesting came up on Facebook during the week on a comrade's on a page, or post, and there was comment by some others there equating us. That's right. I think he believed he was attacking some of the conservative side of politics, which is understandable, especially when in Australia here, it's very dominated by the Murdoch press, and it's just filthy as well. It's completely horrible. But anyway, he was having a go at that, and also some of the conspiracy theorists, etc. And people were saying, "Oh, well, the left is on the nose, people, and and that's just typical left-wing garbage and everything else." I decided to pipe in for once on this, step in on this argument and explain something that about our role as Marxists. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of equating us Marxists, mostly communists, with what we call as the left. I just want to make that absolutely clear. Caleb Morpin's done a lot of talk about this as well, what we call the synthetic left. And I think what actually the whole sentiment was, people are sick and tired of the synthetic left. And we've got to be making sure we've distinguished ourselves separate from what we know as the synthetic left. There's a lot of groups that call themselves socialists. There's a lot of people that call themselves left-wing. But what they are, in fact, is radical middle class. Radical middle class. They are not Marxist at all. And they can be quite dictatorial. And what they do is shout and scream abuse at people who disagree with them, basically, which is an incorrect thing to do. They want to mold people into their thinking. And a lot of they've got some they organise themselves into little parties, or I wouldn't call them parties, I call them grouplets, and they're basically little cults. That's what they are. and it's quite dominant here in Australia as well. And yeah, I like what Caleb did say about the getting out of the movement and getting into the masses. And that's important. And us Marxists, that's what we need to do, is be involved with the masses of everyday people and taking up their concerns, articulating and putting it back to the masses for them to move forward. And it was interesting. I was just doing some little bit of reading on philosophy during the week. Not even extensive study. I had a lot of work to do during the week. But I want to read out this little transcript again, the Communist Manifesto. And it's actually chapter 2, Proletarians and Communists. Bear with me, I forgot my glasses, but I can read without them, but I prefer to have them on. And it goes, and what it says under here, proletarian and communists, in what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? And just before, so their proletarians mean is working class. Actually, it's an old Roman word, meaning workers. The communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. Okay, we have no interests whatsoever separate and apart from the working class as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. One, in the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. Two, in the various stages of development, which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie, aka the capitalists, has to pass through. They always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. That section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. This paragraph is vitally important. It's actually, I believe, a golden rule which should not be broken. The immediate aim of the communist is the same as that of all other proletarian parties. Formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. I'll read that again. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties. Formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat, aka assisting the working class to achieve political power, to seize power. That's what that means. So we do need to keep that always in the back of your mind. It's very easy understood. It's a great little golden rule to keep in the back of the mind always when we go about our activities. And what he meant by the movement there, what Marx and Engels meant by the movement there, at the time the working class was being organised into unions there in the 1800s in Britain. At the time, industry was growing, capitalism was definitely well establishing itself by then, and the industrial worker was obviously taking hold. So, and this was written in 1848. Really interesting. I think I believe 1847. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's still quite relevant to apply today, and it's just very interesting, very basic. So, I'll just want to continue further. There's much more I could read on part 2 of it. I just want to continue on a little further. There's a little bit to this chapter. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. I'll repeat that again. Theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reform. They merely express, in general terms, actual relations springing up from the existing class struggle from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change, consequent upon the change in its historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favour of bourgeois property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of the many by the few. In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. So what they're explaining there was it's not actually seizing someone's house, your own house, or your car, or the clothing you wear, or any of your personal lives. That's your personal property. That's for your own use. You're not using anything else. But if it comes down to someone like bourgeois, what Marx and Engels was talking about was the means of production. Workers seizing production, building their economic basis, etc. And that's what it comes down to: removing all the private profit motive. Now, I understand where the countries have been through revolution didn't have capitalism away straight away. They still needed to keep some capitalist production property and production relations there. Simple reason, they need to build up their industry as well. And for example, we see China now, yes, and it's on the road to moving towards socialism, because it is basically over there in China. It is a system where private profit does not dictate. It is the will of the people through their party. A little bit different at that time. Same with Vietnam. Same with other places. Not perfect, and Cuba as well. And I want to make sure and emphasise this. When people say, "Oh, socialism doesn't work or it doesn't fail," just remember who lifted their. Look at the Soviet Union in the 30s, the 20s and 30s, how they just turned a backward country around within a short span of 20 years and defeated the most powerful military at that time. The fascist junta, the Nazi war machine, ever. They gave their lives to do that. They put the first person into space. They also developed a lot of groundbreaking medical discoveries as well, and a lot of other sciences there as well. And did you know that Cuba's got one of the best health systems, probably the best health system in the world, and it's free for its population over there. They have actually got development treatment programs for cancer. They've actually come across some good cures for cancer as well. Then, same when you look at Vietnam, and look at how Vietnam handled this whole COVID-19. A population of 94 million, and how many people actually got it? Just in a few hundred. They managed to do that right well. It's because they thought of the population first, and any capitalist productions came second. That's highly important, where we always keep that in mind, and that's what Marx and Engels come about. And what distinguishes us, well, we have the ideology of dialectical and historical materialism. That is the proper ideology of the working class. And there's a lot of material about that as well. There's a book, actually, myself and some comrades were studying from a few years on and off. Back in the early last decade, we formed the Bolshevik Club of Western Australia when I was living over in Perth. And one book we were studying quite extensively, and the Facebook page is still continuing, and we still have a lot of this material up there. We've just been put chapter by chapter or verse by verse for understanding about Marxist philosophy. But I think they get his name. Oh, can't pronounce his name really well. V.G. Afanasyev. I do apologise, I can't pronounce that properly, but it's Marxist philosophy. This was written around about the 1970s in the Soviet Union at the time. There's a lot of stuff there now, but there's still a lot of stuff that's really good, and explaining about matter in motion, how things are from lower to higher levels of struggle, from coming into being, from going out of being, starting in its lower form and developing into its higher form, etc. And a lot of it relevant to science as well. So philosophy is one of the oldest sciences on this planet, and dialectical and historical materialism developed by Marx and further continued on through Lenin and many other great Marxists around the world. It certainly is a rich literature in this, and if you can get your hands on it, it's not in print anymore, I'm led to believe, but if you may actually come across some communist parties that may have some copies left. This used to have a purple cover. Unfortunately, it deteriorated over time. But if you can get your hands on it, I would highly recommend that as well. I won't be reading out this today. It's quite a lot to it. But I do refer you to the Bolshevik Club of Western Australia Facebook page as well. And it has a lot of rich literature based out of that book as well. But the one other one I like to read out of, the person who regularly wrote it, this was a copy of it, Dialectical and Historical Materialism by J.B. Stalin. And he published this as a section of the history of the CPSU in 1939, I believe, 1938, 1939. I do have the original copies of some of that. Very, very good read. History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Bolshevik, excellent read as well, because it actually shows you dialectical and historical materialism, matter in motion as well, along with this excellent book as well. Highly recommend that. If you want to see matter in motion and a dialectical and historical materialism applied very easily. Yes, it is a thick book. It's the history of the three internationalists by William Z. Foster. And some of these great Marxists wrote it very simply. Unlike Capital, which is a very hard read to do, and we do get that, this is quite simple. It's quite a lot of reading to do, but it can actually absorb it. And I wouldn't just say read it once and put it away. Always come back to it, references as well at times. It's really good and very historical accuracy as well about those three internationals. I want to go back to dialectical and historical materialism, and just reading this through what he wrote here in the first chapter. Now, I'm going to get a sip of water first. Dialectical and historical materialism. Dialectical materialism is the world outlook of the Marxist-Leninist Party. It is called dialectical materialism because its approach to the phenomena of nature, its method of studying and apprehending them is dialectical, while its interpretation of the phenomena of nature, its conception of these phenomena, its theory, is materialistic. Historical materialism is the extension of the principles of dialectical materialism to the study of social life, an application of the principles of dialectical materialism to the phenomena of the life of society, to the study of society and its history. When describing their dialectical method, Marx and Engels usually refer to Hegel as the philosopher who formulated the main features of dialectics. This, however, does not mean that the dialectics of Marx and Engels is identical with the dialectics of Hegel. As a matter of fact, Marx and Engels took from the Hegelian dialectics only its rational kernel, casting aside its Hegelian idealistic shell, and developed dialectics further so as to lend it a modern scientific form. My dialectical method, says Marx, is not only different from the Hegelian, but it is the direct opposite. To Hegel, some people call Hegel, to Hegel, the process of thinking, which under the name of the idea, he even transforms into an independent subject, is the demiurgos or creator. Some of these words are hard to tackle, just keep in mind when this was written, real world. I'll repeat that. I'll just say, is the creator of the real world. And the real world is only the external, phenomenal form of the idea. With me, on the contrary, the ideal is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind and translated into forms of thought. So basically what Marx was saying, and it's just right through the ages, that matter is primary, idea is secondary. And obviously what we say, what humans want to be correct about this, what we're thinking or what our minds and that is reflective, is a reflection of our material conditions around us at the time. Social being determines social consciousness. And what we do is, as Marxists, we study the material conditions around us at the time moving forward. We look at the contradictions, the antagonisms, the opposites, the unity of opposites, and we look at the way we can develop debating through with other Marxists and really good, generally working class people on the way forward. Very important that we can always keep that in mind. I do see actually on a lot of pages, a lot of idealism come from. I'm not going to have a go at some of those people because they're still learning, and we are bombarded by capitalist ideas. We are bombarded by it every day. The moment we get up to the moment we go to bed at night, the moment we're born to the moment we die, we are bombarded in capitalist society and the capitalist means. And yes, we've been told that capitalism is the final end stage. It is the end result. There's nothing else out there. We do even say like humans are naturally greedy. That's right. I've heard that term before, millions of times as well. I would say. I'll just use that generalised, but I've heard it quite a lot. Humans are greedy, as I've been told by many. We're inherently greedy. Well, I just want to put a correction to that. Wrong. We're not inherently greedy. If you want to look at what greed is, that came in through class society. When class antagonism arose from a slave, feudal through to capitalist, when you saw greed came through. And understand that's just a general term. It's actually secondary, not what's primary. And understand when people in the modern era now, will various times when they say, "Oh, a greedy capitalist or a greedy boss or a greedy business," or they're making more millions or billions a year, they're just being greedy. That's besides the point. We need to objectively study what was going on here. That capitalism, now it's imperialism, where all the wealth's been concentrated in fewer and fewer hands and leaving the rest of the world in destitution and poverty. What we're seeing is not greed. It's because that's what capitalism does. It needs to seek further profit. And yes, there become fewer and fewer of the capitalists. What you're seeing now is a struggle between the super wealthy and the wealthy. The super wealthy is not going to give up its class position, and it will push out others to monopolise further. So that's what we're seeing there. But we know that, and it's good to always keep that in the back of our minds. Not just the back of our minds, always keep on the front foot what's going on. But when people say, "Oh, we're inherently greedy," that is idealism. As one expression of it. There's other expressions as well, like, "Oh, well, things suddenly just happened." Well, things suddenly just don't happen. Maybe in Lord of the Rings they do, but not in everyday life. There is a reason why we're here at this point now, and if we study it properly, we look at how we came to this, and it goes right back many years. And this is why it's quite important to know this stuff and keep going over it again. You don't just read this once and then put it down and off you go. What we need to always keep this in mind. And I actually like how Stalin wrote as well. He wrote very easily for working class people to understand it. There's a lot more detail. You can read Anti-Düring as well by Engels, exceptionally good book, but it can be quite challenging as well with some of the language and the words of the time. But Stalin simplified. Another person actually who wrote excellent stuff on dialectical and historical materialism and philosophy was Mayo. And I do highly recommend his 4 and 5 essays of philosophy on contradiction and on practice. Some really good writings on that. And he actually wrote in a very similar style to Stalin. And think of, thought this was Joseph Stalin wrote this, and no, this was Mao Zedong. And he wrote his writings based on the material conditions at the time in China and his struggles as well, along with the struggles of many of his comrades. So there's brilliant stuff out there to read. And it's not just those two as well. There's many other rich material. Like I've described in a lot more further book, I've actually ordered this book, The Basic Principles of Marxism and Leninism, a primer by Jose Maria Sison. He is the world leader of the International League of People's Struggle, and I believe the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Philippines. And he's wrote some excellent stuff there as well. And I was just still having a quick look through it again this morning. I wouldn't mind doing a study of this as well a bit further on. Don't be put off by that symbol in the background, but look, the Filipino comrades, they are in brutal struggle at the moment. They have to apply their struggle different from how we would in the Western countries here, or the first world countries. Interesting, just on that, before I go too far Australia, did you know actually Australia and New Zealand, we're actually not part of the West. We're part of the global South, but we are first world nation. So it's some interesting contradictions, but we're actually a part of Southeast Asia. Interesting, you look at the geographical landmass and where we are in the world. We're not. We're right on the other side of the world from Europe. We're precisely 12 hours ahead of Greenland, etc. So our really geographically, we're close to Southeast Asia and the rest of Asia, not with Europe and the US. But I want to refer back to this at the time. When describing their materialism, Marx and Engels usually refer to Feuerbach as a philosopher who restored materialism to its rights. This, however, does not mean that the materialism of Marx and Engels is identical with Feuerbach's materialism. As a matter of fact, Marx and Engels took from Feuerbach's materialism its inner kernel, developed it into a scientific philosophical theory of materialism, and cast aside its idealistic and religious ethical encumbrances. We know that Feuerbach, although he was fundamentally a materialist, objected to the name materialism. Engels more than once declared that in spite of the materialist foundation, Feuerbach remained bound by the traditional idealist fetters, and that real idealism of Feuerbach becomes evident as soon as we come to his philosophy of religion and ethics. Furthermore, Feuerbach and the end of classical German philosophy. Dialectics comes from the Greek word dialogo, to discourse, to debate. In ancient times, dialectics was the art of arriving at the truth by disclosing the contradictions in the argument of an opponent and overcoming these contradictions. There were philosophers in ancient times who believed that the disclosure of contradictions in thought and the clash of opposites opinions was the best method of arriving at the truth. This dialectical method of thought later extended to the phenomena of nature, developed in the dialectical method of apprehending nature, which regards the phenomena of nature as being in constant movement and undergoing constant change, and the development of nature as a result of the development of the contradictions in nature as a result of the interaction of opposed forces in nature. As I want to explain here, nothing's static, nothing's permanent. Everything's in a constant state of change. We didn't just come here overnight, arrive here. Things just don't suddenly happen like I've stated as well. There is a whole process of things going into being and things going out of being. I'll give you a classic example. Let's have a look at what the state of our nations are. In Australia here, it's interesting what we're seeing now. COVID-19 certainly exposed it, but it wasn't the cause of the whole economic crisis. There was a whole process of coming into being. So Australia went for a relative economic boom through the 2000s. They claim it right through what we call the GFC, which wasn't. It was a crisis of overproduction. But now what's coming is hitting home, that this couldn't last so long. Nothing lasts that long under capitalism. Things coming into being, things go out of being. We are now facing a worst economic crisis since the 1930s, or even equivalent, worse, whatever. But things will not reveal itself. What's also revealed is just how vulnerable the capitalist economy here in Australia is to the rest of the world. We do not have a very strong domestic market. We do not have a strong manufacturing base either. We're in fact completely screwed if we don't do something about it. So this is a big interesting, but we didn't just arrive to this. It didn't suddenly just happen. There was quite a process over the last 40 years. A lot of deregulation, selling off the Commonwealth Bank, which was a government-run bank, and we also had various state-run banks as well. For example, they deregulated the whole financial money, our government insurance office, the selling off of our naval and our shipyards as well, closing them down, our workshops, etc. All the big things that helped sustain our life for many, many years, especially after that period of the World War II. Right through to the 1970s and probably into the early 80s. Our power generation privatised, everything, all our assets, manufacturing, closed up, went overseas as well. And like I said in an earlier video, I witnessed a lot of that in the 90s as well. And it was certainly very depressing when I look back on it at times. But this is what happened. But we didn't just happen to arrive at this conclusion overnight. So what we're seeing here now is matter in motion. What's interesting is also matter in motion. People are starting to question things out there. Starting to question the system of capitalism itself. And this is what we have to always keep in mind. It's not a battle of ideas. Unfortunately, a lot of parties out there, and I won't name names, so I don't intend to, but at this particular time, but what to them, they tell people how they should be thinking, what they should be doing, basically being dictatorial. That is an incorrect way of doing things as well. All I understand is where people's thinking is at and help them develop further so they can help them with others in their collective to move forward. And a lot of them have actually come under the term the battle of ideas, which is a petty bourgeois, very individualist ideology. And I've come across that a lot of people. You shouldn't be thinking at that, and we all should be doing that. That is one thing, because it's also divorced from everyday reality of working class people. And that's just why it's vitally important to get out of the movement and get into the masses and talk to everyday working class people and finding out their concerns and help them develop further. Now, I'll put it quite simply. We come across with matter, put it to the masses, they come back to us and we condense it and put it back to them. Basically, matter, the idea, matter. That's where it came. And that's where we need to look at some of this practical experience as well. It's a very practical philosophy, and an ideology, dialectical, historical materialism. So that's what distinguishes us from what we call the left. The left, historically, and at times the old left, what's known the 20s and 30s, was predominantly the communist movement and the Marxist movement. Like around the French Revolution time, it was all those who on one side, the right wing of the chair, right wing on the right hand side of the chair, or what we know as the right wing, was the more conservative. They wanted to keep the established feudal order, etc. On the left side of the chair was the left wing, who wanted a more radical program, who wanted to do away with all sorts of feudal system, feudal product property relations, etc. And over years, it's sort of obviously evolved in many ways, and it was certainly a big boost through the first, second, and third international period. And from the 50s onwards, it developed into something different again. And Caleb Warpman's book, The Synthetic Left, which I believe is going to be out sometime soon. Caleb, if you're listening, it'd be interesting to know where that's at, because I'd love to get a copy of that book. And how it was how Marxism was completely distorted, was pushed out altogether, especially out of any of the communist parties around the world. And they went on this new left, radical middle class ideology, etc., which was totally divorced from the working class. In fact, pretty much just left the working class in the lurch, and basically was very dictatorial to it as well. Abandoned all types of populism, etc. And now this is where we're at the moment, where the right wing's taking up a lot of populism. And actually, I'll just give you a little demonstration now, maybe an example. Sorry. There's a Netflix movie called Cuties. I haven't watched it. I refuse to watch it for obvious reasons. And actually, it's appalling. It's disgusting using young children, young girls dressed up, doll them up, and sexualise them as well. That should have been shut down. In fact, the authorities should have actually stepped in and got the producers and directors of that and have them charged, taken to court, and have the book thrown at them, exploiting children like that as well. And unfortunately, the synthetic left aren't really said a word. Not at all. There are people that want to say genuinely left wing. That's okay. Marxists spoke out, but not them. And so I'm not going to accuse the synthetic left of endorsing it, not a word. But the main provocateurs, or the main people that were really arcing up about it, was the right wing. And you think we'd been doing that a lot more. And so I'm just giving it, and a lot of people said, yes, this is bad, horrible. There should be calls for these people to take that movie down, or that documentary down. And on top of that, maybe have the book thrown at those people who actually made that film. It was appalling, and actually Netflix has got a lot of explaining to do for them as well. Was there? Where was all this so-called synthetic left? Nowhere. And you can see what I mean. I'm just giving you as a demonstration. Where's the synthetic left when it comes to the economic crisis affecting everyday working class people? Nowhere. I remember once, years ago, I was at a politics pub in Sydney, and mind you, I did have a few beers in me by then, but I was over it when I was hearing complain about Pauline Hanson getting political now in the Senate, and the influence of Pauline Hanson. For those of you overseas, you want to know who she is. She is a right-wing, radical right-wing, extreme right-wing, or ultra-conservative figure in the federal parliament. Very popular, and took on a lot of populist things. And the people who call themselves left were complaining about it. She was racist and all this, etc. And they were complaining about why working class people followed her. The simple question I asked: when's the left going to stand up for working class people again? When's the left going to organise working class people to seize power? I was a bit drunk. I should have actually think of, so I don't recommend go drinking and then start shooting your mouth off. That was a bit silly of me doing at the time, but I did ask a very valid question. They couldn't answer it. That's where it comes down to. So we do need to make sure we always keep that in mind. Our ideology and that as well, and we've got to learn to get back on them as populism as well, and wrestle control and give it a working class way forward. Not radical middle class, not all these other heady bourgeois ideologies thrown in, or capitalist ideologies. I'd like to just continue a bit further. I am aware of the time. I just want to check the time for a minute. It is it's 9:05, so I'll finish up very soon as well. I want to keep this nice and short because I do want to actually get out and about, like I've said to you before, and I want to just make sure that we've got everything covered. But I will be back again next Saturday at 9 o'clock, the usual time. I just wanted to start a little bit earlier today so I can finish off in time. If you want to go out and about. Just sort of continue further. 1. The principal features of the Marxist dialectical method are as follows. Contrary to metaphysics, dialectics does not regard nature as an accidental agglomeration of things, of phenomena, unconnected with, isolated from, and independent of each other, but as a connected and integral whole, in which things, phenomena are organically connected with, dependent on, and determined by each other. Some water. The dialectical method, therefore, holds that no phenomenon in nature can be understood if taken by itself, isolated from surrounding phenomena, inasmuch as any phenomenon in the realm of nature may become meaningless to us if it is not considered in connection with the surrounding conditions, but divorced from them, and that, vice versa, any phenomenon can be understood and explained if considered in its inseparable connection with surrounding phenomena as one condition by surrounding phenomena. Contrary to metaphysics, dialectics holds that nature is not a state of rest and immobility, stagnation and immutability, but a state of continuous movement and change, of continuous renewal and development, where something is always arising and developing, and something always disintegrating and dying away. The dialectical method therefore requires that phenomena should be considered not only from the standpoint of their interconnection and interdependence, but also from the standpoint of their movement, their change, their development, their coming into being and going out of being. Their dialectical method regards as important primarily not that which at the given moment seems to be durable and yet is already beginning to die away, but that which is arising and developing, even though at the given moment it may appear to be not durable, but the dialectical method considers invincible only that which is arising and developing. All nature, says Engels, from the smallest thing to the biggest, from grains of sand to suns, from protista as the primary living cells to man, has its existence in eternal coming into being and going out of being, in a ceaseless flux, in unresting motion and change. Therefore, dialectics, Engels says, comprehends things and their representations, ideas and their essential connection, concatenation and motion, origin and ending. C. Contrary to metaphysics, dialectics does not regard the process of development as a simple process of growth, where quantitative changes do not lead to qualitative changes, but as a development which passes from insignificant to imperceptible quantitative changes, to open fundamental changes, to qualitative changes, to development in which the qualitative changes occur not gradually, but rapidly and irrevocably, taking the form of a leap from one state to another. They occur not accidentally, but as the natural result of an accumulation of imperceptible and gradual quantitative changes. That's very important. Just always keep that in mind. The dialectical method therefore holds that the process of development should be understood not as a movement in a circle, not as a simple repetition of what has already occurred, but as an onward and upward movement, as a transition from an old qualitative state to a new qualitative state, as development from the simple to the complex, from the lower to the higher. What I've been talking about. Nature, says Engels, is the proof of dialectics. It must be said from modern science that it has furnished this proof with very rich materials increasing daily, and thus has shown that, in the last result, nature works dialectically and not metaphysically. Describing dialectical development as a transition from quantitative changes to qualitative changes, Engels said, in physics, every change is a passing of quantity into quality, as a consequence of the quantitative change of the amount of motion of one form or another that is inherent in the body of or communicated to it. Thus, temperature of water is, in the first place, a point of no consequence in respect to its liquidity. Still, with the increase or diminution of the temperature of liquid water, there comes a point where the state of cohesion alters and the water is converted into steam or ice. So what he's meaning there, basically, if you want to see qualitative, qualitative change, for example, a glass of water, right? It's just a cool temperature, but it is not just going to suddenly boil, right? We need to apply this external and the internal there as well. So for water to boil, you put this in a pot or a pan or in a pot or a kettle on the stove. Now, it's not going to immediately boil. It takes time for it to heat up. So you have the external outside heating. But gradually, you'll see the temperature of water and you'll start seeing movement in the water, like bubbles and vapor forming. That's where it's quantitative, and this is where the quantitative is turning into the qualitative. You've got all these, now it's turning into extreme hot water. It's boiling, what we call the boiling point. It's turning into vapor or steam. Otherwise, steam you can't see, it's vapor what we see. And if you stick your finger in it, what we call it gets burnt, what happens is all these million little molecules moving around, forming this friction. That's what it is. You're pouring it in. Well, it didn't just happen to be like that. It's had to apply to a few conditions around it. It had to have the heat to do it, and it had to have it's also internal as well. Its internal body, which would have made it get to that point. You can't do the same to a rock, for example. Or I'll give another demonstration. An egg. You want to have a boiled egg for breakfast. Well, it just doesn't become immediately a boiled egg. There's certain conditions that would require it. So obviously, put it in your pot in the morning, turn the stove on. So the water heats up to a boiling point. Like I just said, it went from a low to a higher level, and it's boiling there. Now, we have the external, which is all the heat and the boiling water applying to the outside of the egg to going in the inside, and you have the internal. So there's a change happening internally as well. And it's constantly from the very liquid egg yolk, it's now turning into a solidified. So once you take that out, you have a fully boiled egg. You can't do the same to a rock, though. Always remember, this is why it's widely important. We need to study the material conditions, our current ones. If you put a rock in water, heat it up, boiling, you're not going to have the same results as if you would boil an egg. The rock will still lay it because it's internal. You have the external pressure is still upon it, but its internal one is a completely different from what that is of an egg. And that's why we see things scientifically, and vitally important we know our stuff there as well. And what we're seeing here in Australia, no doubt through the world, where capitalism is now, imperialism, we all have our each internal contradictions in our countries. The antagonisms are coming sharp. There's a lot of similarities, like with us, New Zealand, US and Canada, and some in Europe as well. There's also our own distinctive features as well we need to understand, and how we come to these points. In the US, yes, elections are a very polarised society. To a certain degree, it's polarised here as well. Won't ignore that. But things change. And when we can't just apply a one-size-fits-all to all forms of struggle. I'm just about to cough now, excuse me. Oh, pardon me. That you can't apply that to as a one-size-fits-all for everything. I can understand during the 20s and 30s why the old communist parties used the Soviet Union as a model, because that was the first model in an historical development of human history that ever happened, achieving socialism and all the building they were doing at the time. So obviously he used it. Now we need to look at what we need to do in our distinctive countries. Our struggle here in Australia will be completely different. It'll look different compared to, say, for example, Venezuela. Well, let's say Philippines, example. It'd be completely different. The principle, the kernel itself, when we say this, and what the whole ideology, well, is how we apply ourselves to the struggle here, and we need to move forward. And Caleb Morton talked about Americans or socialism with American characteristics, and it will apply to that to the US. In Australia here, we'd have socialism with Australian characteristics, same unique form It's a very unique country. It's certainly in a very ancient country landmass, but I'll get into the geographical history of it. But it was certainly, it'll look completely different here as well. So there's no just one way of doing things as well. But if we know your stuff and keep applying this to your struggle every day and applying this to working class people, you're certainly able to maybe look back and achieve things. You make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We learn from that as well. What went right, what went wrong. And that's what a lot of good comrades around the world are doing at the moment. In Australia here, we're up for a very big struggle against, and I might sound like a wages and conditions issue, but there's obviously a lot of things behind the scenes happening. I can't speak on that at the moment. I'm not going to give an opinion about it because I daily need to get the whole cold hard facts in front of me so I can study it myself, give an opinion on. But there's certainly a lot of things happening behind the scenes with the Business Council and various other employer groups what we're planning for Australian workers here. And it's not pretty as well. That's all I've got to say on that at the moment. But look, I hope I want to go out and enjoy the rest of the weekend. So I wish us all the best for the weekend. Tune in next week. I'll be back at the usual time at 9 o'clock. And look, I want to ask you, can you share this out? Share this far and wide, promote it as well. We want to start building up our audience a lot more. I mean, people view it during the week. Let me know too. Just send me a message if we're on a different time. No, you're not going to have it 1 o'clock in the morning my time because I want to actually have my sleep. But if you wish to, please share this far and wide. Share it through your Twitter account, your Facebook, any other social media. And we need to build that community because one thing though, even though we our struggles might be a little bit different from each other's countries or we have material conditions, but our movement is still international. And well, the old saying is the environment movement said, you think globally, but act locally. And that's what we're doing. We're all part of it. And if you want to, especially if you are those of you who want to assist the revolutions around the world, such as the Venezuelans, etc., well, we need to get things happening here in our own respective countries. Not a matter just forming, having functions, raising money, and then going solidarity for solidarity. That's all very well and might feel good, but we need to actually develop our struggles here if we want to take on imperialism. And imperialism is on the nose with everyone now. It certainly is. It is being reflected everywhere. We can see what's happening around the world. The world is rising up slowly, but in its own way. Not the way we would like it to be, but the people of their respective countries are taking up that struggle, and it's refreshing to see as well. It's very impressive. And I believe in the US there, a lot of people are starting to wake up too. You've got a lot, and comrades over there, you've got a lot of work to do as well. I understand you're going to be working on some pretty extreme surrounds or conditions, being pretty extreme conditions. But even here too in Australia and elsewhere, we do need to make sure that we develop our struggle further here. And we at times things will be extreme here as well. So look, I want to end it at that tonight. This morning, and wish you all the best. As I said, I'm off to enjoy the weekend, seeing snow-capped mountains, and I'm off to see nice green fields and forests and mists and cool rivers, and I might even go down the coast on probably either Monday or have a look there as well. So I want to enjoy it. I only got one life, and I like to. I do one thing about comrades: you do have to enjoy his life at times as well. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you once again, and I'll going to tune out now and take it easy, and I'll see you all next week. Dare to struggle, dare to win. If you don't fight, you lose. Thank you.